Good day, and welcome to today's roundtable with a top appointee of the incoming administration. I am Willie Reyes, Editor-in-Chief of BusinessWorld, and joining me today are my fellow editors, Kathy Garcia, Managing Editor, Betty Rock, Editor for Banking and Finance, Norman Aquino, Editor for Political Economic Issues, and Troy Medina, who is in charge of macroeconomic matters. We are pleased to have with us today Philippine Competition Commission Chairperson Arsenio Balisacan, who returns next month to head the National Economic and Development Authority. Before his stint as the PCC's first chairman, and before that as top socio-economic planner, Chairperson Balisacan was Dean of the UP School of Economics, Director and Chief Executive of the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, and Undersecretary for Policy and Planning at the Agriculture Department. Before joining the UP faculty in 1987, he was Research Fellow at the East-West Center in Honolulu and economist at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. A lifetime member of the National Academy of Science and Technology, he obtained his PhD in economics from the University of Hawaii, his MS in agricultural economics at UP Los Baños, and Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from Mariano Marcos State University. Welcome, Chairperson Balisacan, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you also for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Let me start discussions with this. Um, the present administration assumed office with a vision for much faster, more inclusive economic growth. How would you describe the planned overall economic thrust of the incoming government for the next 6 years?
We plan to get the economic recovery quickly, moving the economy to its high growth trajectory, and achieve over the duration of the administration 6 to 8% growth. We will need to accompany that growth with better access to or improvement in access to social services, particularly health, education, to ensure that that growth is inclusive. We'll also focus on jobs, particularly on high quality jobs, and that will mean that we'll have to revisit our manufacturing to make it a more robust contributor to quality job creation. And of course, in the near term, we are challenged by the global environment and the uncertainty in the continuing uncertainty in the pandemic 19. But we believe that given the achievements over the last 20 or so years, this process of reform and institution building over the years, I think that those targets are achievable.
Thank you, Doctor. Let me just go to a specific concern that cropped up. Early Thursday morning, reports that the Federal Reserve has unleashed its biggest rate hike since 1994. That's nearly 3 decades, 75 basis points. And it also signaled the possibility of similar magnitudes for the rest of the year. As a seasoned economist, a respected economist, can you just explain to us how that will impact our economy? I mean, what challenges will that Fed outlook bring to your job, and what can be done to help the economy weather that impact?
Of course, we are a small, open economy, no? So any developments in the global market, whether these are via the trade or financial flows, those have impact on us, no? And obviously, if the interest rates are rising outside of our country, we have to adjust to that because that if you don't, capital will move out of the country, right?
Mhm.
And our job, our challenge really to get capital into the country rather than out of the country.
Mhm.
And then, of course, when capital moves out, that uh, have several other repercussions on your exchange rate,
Mhm.
obviously also the in the medium term to long term, and your ability to create jobs because if those financial uh, uh, misalignment of our macroeconomy would inhibit flow of investment also into our shores that would have a long-term impact. So those are, I think we can, we don't think that the macroeconomic fundamentals are have
At
been
risk.
are that bad compared to many
Uh,
some other countries. No? That we can withstand these shocks. Obviously, we have to be very mindful. We have to be very always alert and adjusting to the shocks because, as you know, failure to do so can be so damaging to the economy.
mhm. Thank you, sir. Kathy, I believe you have a question.
Yes, good morning, sir. Like in your view, is the NEDA's goal to reach upper middle income country status next year achievable? And what will it take to achieve that?
Um, well, as you know, the in 2019 we were hoping to achieve the middle income status in 2 years, no? But then 2020, our economy contracted sharply. So with even with the growth of 5.7 last year, and even if we are soon to grow at 6% this year, that's not likely going to put us back to that goal. No? So it may take a while for us to achieve or to reach that point. It's probably if we grow at 7% next year and 7% another 7 8, because we are targeting growth, as I said, to be around 6 to 8%
Mm.
for the duration of the administration. So if we grow at 7% next year, 7%, well, maybe 2024 will probably be there.
2024. Um,
Sir, about RCEP, the
ah,
Senate failed to ratify RCEP. So will you push for the RCEP ratification? I think incoming President Marcos has signaled that he wants to review it. So, and how do you balance the benefits and risks of joining RCEP?
My take on that is that there are there's a bigger picture that we need to look at, and the bigger the benefits are broader than the what you can see in this in the trade flows, for example, agriculture, which is a major concern. Uh, but we should be looking at the big picture, and for us to send to the world that we are open to business. We welcome investors in the country. We don't give unnecessary preconditions unless these are damaging to certain sectors. So I think that that's part of the signals that we need to put out there that we are open, just and clearly given the new uh, place, new games in town in the global trade where supply chains are interconnected and value chains are. We want to be part of that global value chains, and so if the investors, that international traders don't see us as a key player in this value chains, then we could not expect even investors to think about us. So that is important, and I think that we need to ratify the RCEP.
just a follow up, Chairman. you've been an agricultural economist for the longest time. So how do you answer, for instance, concerns raised by some farm groups about the impact of RCEP on their sector?
My take is that we can never really protect and do justice to our agriculture if our means of protecting our agriculture is inhibit competition, no? Prevent competition. Uh, the the fact is the main sources of low productivity in agriculture has nothing to do with trade. It is the lack of public investments and the lack of institutional support to our sector, the lack of bad governance in the or the the bad governance in the sector. Uh, and talking about infrastructure, I'm talking even the infrastructure for research and innovation in agriculture. Uh, our productivity, yield per hectare or production per hectare is so low compared to our neighbors. Uh, so we can't expect to become competitive even in our manufacturing or industries if the our agricultural sector is performing badly. In fact, the our capacity to remain competitive in our manufacturing uh, hinges also on the productivity of our agricultural sector. Because if we can increase productivity, uh, farmers' income would rise, then that become a big part of the domestic market. Even more importantly, the cost of food will be lower than what otherwise is the case right now, and that would temper demands for higher wages by our workers, and that make our manufacturing and even the export services exports more competitive. So there's so much to gain,
Mhm.
both in the agriculture as well as in the rest of the economy, uh, if we can make our agriculture sector more productive.
Um, yeah, just I think there'll be some questions later about agriculture, but just since we're there, just to follow up, now everyone seems to know, or at least many experts seem to know what's wrong with productivity in agriculture. What do you think is the problem that we haven't really gotten down to improving it much, and also how long will it take for us to reach or at least approach the productivity, for instance, of Vietnam and other neighboring countries?
That's a very good question. Uh, First, raising productivity particularly in agriculture, is not something that can come from a manna from heaven. Uh, you have to work hard on it. We have to invest into generating technologies, innovations that are appropriate for our farmers, that are appropriate for the various local conditions of the country. Uh, and it's not something like in manufacturing that you can import a technology and what can be assembled in China can be assembled
Mm.
here. That's not the case for agricultural the seeds that are produced in the US, when you plant them here, it will not yield the same benefits as you get there, because the local conditions, the climate, the soil, the pests are so different. No? So
Mhm.
we really have to invest in R&D, and D, and that's where, if you look at the support that we have given to our research and development, contrary to claims by some sectors, we are the poorest in the Asian region. We have so low. We have very little regard for science,
Mm.
and even more for agricultural sciences, and that's how you know our R&D efforts expressed as say government expenditure for research, innovation, and agriculture as a proportion of value added for the sector, no?
Mhm.
Um, or even say GDP for easier comparison. No? In many countries, this runs to 1%, 2%, and if you are investing 2% of your GDP for R&D, that you are likely to grow fast, and productivity is likely to. Here, it's in our country. Is the last time I look at it's 0.3%. It's so far from the efforts that are research efforts are given by our even by our neighbors. So we have to reset our priorities, go back to the basics, uh, and address the key sources of productivity growth. There are, of course, others like finances, access to
Mhm.
finance. Again, our rural sector is so left out in the financial system. Uh,
Mhm.
communication infrastructures, but the internet, even for so-called inclusive finance, no, where
Mhm.
this fintech, so-called, is so slow in getting into the rural areas because you don't have internet infrastructure that it does these far flung areas. There are uh, and finance, the access to finance is crucial because that gives farmers working capital, and farmers are small farmers, and they don't really have much savings or working capital for that. They have to if they want to adopt modern technologies, machineries, modern seeds, they need working capital. And yet, uh, their access to working capital, especially for small farmers, is very limited because they don't have the collateral.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
the land reform that was supposed to give land to them did not work out uh, as promised because the land reform was never really completed. We, what our government distributed over the years is a collective title, not a parcelized individual titles that the farmers can use for collateral. And so, you know, uh, what do we expect from the farmers? And if you don't have access to finance,
Mhm.
you can't access modern technologies. So things like that, apart from the many issues that the market already knows, like access to markets, infrastructure, and so on.
Mm. Thank you, Doctor. Troy, I believe you have a related question on production in agriculture, correct?
Uh, the 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 basic approach to food security has been to import a lot, and
Mhm.
that has put the government in conflict with the producers who say the producers should be supported more, and they're saying "I told you so" because suddenly food became very difficult to obtain. Uh, what kind of balance do you hope to strike between imports and domestic production support for domestic producers?
Okay, let me put it this way, Timothy. In the 1970s, our population was less than half of what we are today, right? Farm size, farmlands have hardly increased because they're fixed land, right? Fixed geography. So the only way we could have increased production to match the increases in our population, because remember, population is increasing rapidly, is to increase productivity. And that's what I was saying earlier. But that's where we have failed because we have not been investing in sources of productivity for our farmers and access to technology so that their yield per hectare and their profits per hectare could have risen along with population growth. No? So in the meantime, so your total production is lagging far behind than your total demand because of your population growth and because of income growth in urban areas. Uh, if you don't import, you're gonna have all those prices skyrocketing, right? So it's you're torn into that situation. You don't like you as much as possible. We want to reduce imports, but given the very low uh, production capacity, you don't have a choice unless you want uh, inflation to be running, food inflation to be running 10% over 10% a year, as you have in many Latin American countries in recent decades. So the point here is that the only way we can achieve uh, the big part of our production of our consumption needs, I mean, is to increase productivity, to increase the profitability of our farming. Uh, and again, there's no shortcut there because we really have to do this long-term uh, investments that which we neglected over decades, for many decades. So we are simply harvesting now what we failed to do uh, decades earlier.
Thank
That's
you.
it, right? Okay. Um, our banking editor, Betty, I believe you have a question.
Yes. Hi, sir. Good morning.
Everything.
Uh, with the BSP starting to tighten its policy, how can the government ensure that recovery would be sustained despite rising inflation and interest rates? Also, what are the biggest risks to the growth outlook? And when do you see growth returning to pre-pandemic levels?
Okay. Now, as I said earlier, the challenges facing us are enormous, no? But they are not insurmountable. Uh, Obviously, our economy depends so much on consumption growth, and what worries us is that when inflation is high, particularly food inflation, then that source of growth will be dampened. No? So to ensure that we manage that inflation well. Unfortunately, that inflation is external. It's coming from the outside. It would have been an easier matter if from within because our policy levers can handle that directly. But that does not mean that we can do anything. Obviously, that thing that worries me and that should worry us all is that the burden of the inflation should not hit so badly the poor and vulnerable groups. So I think we need to strengthen our social protection system. I have been talking with our team, the economic managers team, and also with our with the president on this issue digitalization and and internet, because I think that we can ramp up the digitalization, particularly the implementation of the PhilSys, the National Identification System. Then we can simplify uh, and save a lot of resources in the provision of ayuda, no? Of safety nets to our poor people. We could provide, we could with less fiscal resources, we could achieve more if we could reduce the leakage. There's the in the recent past when we provided ayuda, did not matter whether you are living in Forbes Park or in in the informal settlers in Quiapo, you get the same amount. No? We to say a lot of but given the urgency of the times and the lack of other uh, ways of delivering assistance to affected households, perhaps we can understand that, but that should not be repeated because that's a wasteful uh, way of reaching the poor, of assisting the poor. We can achieve more with limited resources by properly targeting assistance to the most needy. So that's what we can do, and we must do urgently. I think this acceleration of e-commerce, internet, and digital economy should provide a way for us to achieve a, a better way of organizing the bureaucracy, the government, and its delivery of assistance to the needed groups. So that's one that I can see. The other one, of course, is again is still in with respect to fiscal consolidation. Is we need to prioritize and services, infrastructure, for example, that generate jobs. And for this, the instruction of the incoming president is that we should continue infrastructure projects that are near completion, even with limited resources. So in terms of priority, we should give priority to those projects that the benefits can be realized sooner than later, and in the meantime also generate jobs. My colleague, Secretary Benjok, of the DOF, has is looking at how tax administration can be improved so that we can realize higher revenues even with the just the existing laws, tax laws. At the same time, we need to sit down. Anyway, we actually started sitting down with the leaders of the House of Congress to ensure that what we see as we are putting on the table as priorities to address these current issues will be also supported by Congress by way of legislation. So dapat magkatugma yung ginagawa ng executive branch at saka yung legislative branch. That's what we want to achieve, and we hope that will happen. What else? In the meantime, also, I think just like in my former role as cabinet member during the Aquino administration, when I noticed that it took a while for the private sector to build that confidence, business confidence, whether to invest or not to invest. If you look, for example, at the level of investment from 2010 to 2012, first 2 years, parang walang nangyayari, so it led me to know what was happening, why it's despite all that seemingly good reception to the presidency, you don't see that in terms of investment. But of course, that changed in the second half of 2012, if my memory serves me right. And then investment in manufacturing and other sectors started to come in. We hope that this time around, that wait and see attitude will be much shorter. We can afford a 1 year or 2 year, wait and see attitude. I think that we need to. We are telling the business community, the government is serious about working with them, getting the private sector to come in and robustly. And for that matter, we will reinvigorate the PPP, the public-private partnership, because obviously partly because of the fiscal bind, we want to continue development of infrastructure, which the last time I look at the infrastructure data across countries, we're still far lagging behind in terms of the intensity of investment. There's so much thing to do, and we need the private sector there. So we'll be working closely with the private sector to ensure that PPP is attractive to them, as well as, of course, to address concerns about contingency liabilities and risk sharing that parties need to worry about.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, if I got it right, now you started meeting already with the leaders of the incoming Congress, correct?
Oh, we have, yes. At least they sat down initially, but with this incoming speaker, and I am asked to also sit down with them again next week. So I hope that we can also by then identify some of our priority legislation that
Right. Okay.
and so
Yeah, because I think some of our editors here have questions about it and also about the revival of the PPP. But before that, I think Norman, you have a question on the fiscal side.
sorry, I don't hear you, Norman.
Norman, you're
Mr. Balisacan,
ayan, there.
you
Okay.
you you mentioned inflation, and we all know that monetary policy can only do so much.
Yeah.
I think you partly answered what I was going to ask you, and I was supposed to ask you what other fiscal interventions do you think will we need to cushion the economy from the effects of global events? And also, you mentioned Ayuda. How do you plan to fund proposed stimulus package given our record debt?
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned about the need to prioritize. No, we are revisiting for example, the 2023 budget that is going to be submitted. You know that the 2023 the preparation for the 2023 budget started way back. No, as early as January that preparations started. So it's almost in its final form. But I think we'll have the window to revisit that given the changes in local and global conditions. No? Because when those budgets were uh, framed, I think they don't have yet uh,
Mhm.
this possibility that the Ukraine war, for example, could last longer. The disruptions in the global supply chain is really much more serious than earlier thought out. So, uh, and in revisiting those budgets, I already mentioned what needed to be prioritized. No? I would look I like to see that one that those ongoing projects, to the extent that they are found to be economically and socially viable, must continue. We must not resort to the old practice of stopping a project even if it's good because it was initiated by the previous administration. So it doesn't do well to the economy. So that's one. Second, that we must focus on this infrastructure that really addresses the, weaknesses in our supply chain, in our connectivity infrastructure. Um, and so I think that for example, internet infrastructure is a key one, but also infrastructure that would connect uh, the leading areas of the country to lagging areas of the country, so that growth could spread and could be more inclusive. That has to be given priority over over basketball courts or stadium. That uh, when we are richer and we have more funds and the economy can grow, can become much bigger, we can also afford those ones. But I think we just have to set our priorities right, to those ones that will create jobs and improve well-being. And the third that I would like to see is the our investment in our health, education, and social protection. Uh, the history of nations, not just our country, show you that whenever there are fiscal crises or um, the sectors that usually suffer the most are the sectors that are that where the poor are, the largest of the poor are. And I'm talking about public health, public education, uh, and uh, given the scarring that has been created by the pandemic, we should not allow that to happen. That that the the insufficient support to our social sector will continue. No? That must be addressed quickly because our fear is that the deterioration in our human capital, especially for our children, no? uh, will hit us bad no, down the road, no? 10 years from now, when these children will join the labor force and they will be as less productive as the Vietnamese or the Indonesians or Taiwan, Thais. So we really have to take this longer view.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Just a question regarding funding sources. Can we avoid new taxes, or is tax administration na lang ba, like what happened in the Aquino administration, or will we eventually have to think of new taxes within the next 6 years?
No, I think we should. Part of the fiscal consolidation is to eventually also uh, come up with new sources of tax. You want more, if you want more public services, if you want to invest a lot into our health and education and social sector and our farmers, you must have sources of money for that. Obviously, you can only go so far with improved tax administration. Down the road, you need new sources of tax. I guess the issue is really much more of timing. That you don't want to raise, I suppose, taxes when the economic conditions are difficult. No? I think that there are some sectors that are under tax. I think I would suspect that. Although I will have to look at this closely, that mining, for example, is one. I think that there are scopes for improving the royalty that, for example, that can be charged mining products to ensure that this uh, uh, mining resources are properly managed and sustained.
Although tinaas na, sir, yung ano, no, yung excise tax sa mining in the
Yeah, I haven't
trade.
really seen the numbers lately, but I thought that that's a possibility. But obviously, when we go there, we have to study the situation.
What other taxes are you looking at or could be tapped?
No, I think that I would rather leave that assignment to my colleagues sa finance. Their houses are properly are closer to those issues than what I have. But I believe that 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 I suppose some of those sin taxes, pollution taxes. I mean, there are. For example, I don't understand why luxury vehicles are taxed so low. Or even vehicles are taxed so low compared to our neighbors. And I think that while we are trying to address transport issues, public transport issues, that should be part of the solution, rather than just building more skyways, and it's also have to improve our ability to uh, impose a pollution tax or tax on our roads.
Yeah, and you did say that timing here is crucial, no? Because you cannot add new taxes when people are in dire straits. So at the same time, there's that wisdom that says that any new difficult reforms or taxes should be before the midterm elections, no? So what can you say about that?
No, I guess that my take on the whole process is that I would have I understand that the package, this whole reform package has several phases, and we front loaded the relatively easy ones. It is to the ones that will reduce taxes, whether it's income taxes or corporate taxes. You don't get much, resistance from Congress for those kind of taxes. But you could have, of course, you need to offset those with sources, where they are going to get the sources of revenues that will replace what will decrease. And what happened is, leave that to the next government. Uh, of course, there was an attempt by the outgoing administrations and the Secretary Dominguez to pass all these measures within their time frame. Unfortunately, they ran out of time. Congress didn't have the appetite for it, for the other components of the reforms. So now it's the burden of this new administration to complete those other components. But as my colleague Sec Ben said, we need to to study those our options but surely also assuring the community that we will address all these fiscal issues to ensure that the growth will be sustainable and will not be trampled by a crisis down the road, fiscal crisis down the road.
Yes. And earlier on another matter, you did say that you want growth to spread. I think one of our editors, Troy, you have a question along that line.
Yes. Sir, the one of the centerpiece programs of the current government was to push development out to the countryside to basically decentralize the economy. And I think they tried, and I think one of the things they did was to freeze approvals of economic zones in Metro Manila, so the investors would try to explore the countryside. How much do you think this policy achieved, and is it something you are inclined to continue with? And do you consider certain areas of the country in great need of more investment to the point where the government has to put its thumb on the scale to favor investment there?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Timothy. The way I look at our economy is that it's too Manila centric, it's too exclusive, and as a result, the kind of poverty reduction that we have achieved is not as encouraging as what you might expect from the same rate of growth when it was experienced by our neighbors. With that same level of growth experience. So there's a big issue on the inclusivity of growth. And our view is that growth has to spread out in the rest of the country. It doesn't make sense for me to see that almost 2/3 of the economic activity in Metro Manila and neighboring areas. When you have so much potential for similar growth outside Manila, but the trick is really building that connectivity. We need to connect lagging regions, lagging areas to the leading regions like Metro Manila. But I also don't think that the way to go is to have export processing zones in every province, every municipality, every city. I think that's a waste. That does not make sense, economic sense at least, especially if you have very limited resources. You probably have to look at our eco zones in a more uh, a rational way, so that you can have, just a few zones that, and then give it the full support, so that the agglomeration benefits that we want to see in the zones can be realized. Uh, so I would want to see, some of those zones in the Visayas, in the Mindanao, and uh, provided with full support administratively, infrastructure-wise, and institutional wise, including even possible, labor laws. I think if you can uh, get those eco zones very competitive, uh, then you might be able to attract Japanese, for example, companies live in China. I was talking with the Japanese ambassador and the JICA yesterday, and uh, they were telling me that Japanese companies living in China are considering Philippines and Vietnam, but Vietnam has the edge because they have better infrastructure. Their zones are fully supported. Unlike us, where uh, you have a zone but it's not connected uh, with with the leading centers, and also the cost of inputs like power and and telecom, are expensive. So those are the things that we need to address, so that we can make other regions more viable for agglomeration, for investment outside of Metro Manila.
Sir, just a follow up. In recent years, there has been talk of different kinds of economic zones. Like we associate economic zones with light manufacturing and with BPOs and office work. But I have seen people proposing things like mining economic zones, forestry economic zones. Are there other types of economic zones we should be looking at to address the what other provinces are good at? We can't all be good office workers. They can't all be good manufacturing sites, etc. Are there different kinds of economic zones we should be looking at, sir?
I am not aware of those yet, Timothy, but definitely when I assume the office, I will have the better opportunity to look at the data, the plans of DTI with respect to those zones. But I think that in our meeting with the economic team, that idea of reviewing our approach to eco zones comes up, uh, the whole idea is that with this the zones would have to be supported with services, including connectivity like roads, uh, power, and so on. And obviously, that would mean fiscal resources, right? And and our fiscal resources are very limited, so you can't afford to have too many of those zones, right? But we can have a few zones, but fully support it, so that it's attractive enough for investors to even think about moving into the zones. So that's I would rather focus on those, especially there are many zones that are under capacity, underutilized, no? Like the one in Bataan, for example. How many firms are there? No? And it has been there for how many decades now?
It was the first, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So so that begs the question, no, back why? And then they have Clark, that's so big, and you have so big, that's so big. Why? And I guess you can also go to Visayas and Mindanao. There are already many of those existing zones that have not been optimized, that have developed in a very slow fashion. Uh, Compared to the kind of zones you see in many in our neighbors. No, when China put up its zones in the coastal areas that was quickly populated, and only then they move to other areas. That should be our approach, rather than spreading the zones all over the country. Uh, and I think that we should make some zones that are really that can grow quickly, and then later on, when you have more resources, uh, spread go to other areas, spread the portion.
Well,
All
speaking
right.
of, yeah, go ahead, Troy.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. Well, speaking of resources, particularly when it comes to countryside development, Chairman, right now, um, in principle at least, LGUs should have more funds because of the
Yes.
Mandanas ruling. It's in effect. But then we do know that for most LGUs, the absorptive capacity, spending capacity is so limited. How do you address that?
Yeah. That has also come up in our recent discussion with the economic team already. No? There is clearly a need to provide to assist the LGUs in absorption capacity. Uh, the also the incoming president also instructed NEDA us to strengthen our uh, the rates of NEDA insofar as resource programming is concerned, monitoring, project evaluation, um, reaching out to LGUs, no, to the provinces, to the municipalities and cities. As of now, the NEDA is organized along regional divides. No? It's at the regions where we are concentrated, but our reach to the provinces uh, is far limited. So that's something that we have to work out in our at NEDA to provide that assistance to LGUs,
Mhm.
especially in ensuring that what they identified as essential and critical public investments get into the regional and eventually into the national. No? Because what happens sometimes is that when you look at the list of public investment programs, for example, at the national level, um, there seems to be a disconnect with what the provinces see as their priorities. And I think that there's some dynamics there. Uh, Perhaps that's the process of identifying those public investments doesn't uh, uh, involve much of that consultation with the LGUs. So we have to revisit our framework to ensure that that captures the instruction of the incoming president.
Yes, let's go back to your other statement that you've already started meetings with the next speaker. Um, I think Betty has a question along that line.
Yes, yes, sir. What economic measures are you proposing for inclusion in the next administration's legislative agenda?
Um, so far, we don't have the specific measures yet, Bettina, because we still have to meet as a team, as you know, with the other secretaries. And also, I was just started also reviewing some of these um, transition reports that I received from my outgoing colleague. And they have already indicated some pending legislative measures. No? So I would like to look into those. And obviously, some of this will likely going to include some of the tax measures for administration or for improve um, connectivity, like for example the open access data. I think that uh, we need to push for that, and then this national land use bill that has been sitting around for how many uh, congresses, and it has not been passed. So, and that's what's making uh, infrastructure planning and related planning exercises extremely difficult because and quite costly and inefficient because
Mhm.
you don't have a national land use plan for the country. And we hope that we can get that passed in this incoming Congress. There are
How
many
about
more, I believe, but I am not in a position now
mhm,
to uh, uh, provide you the.
divulge?
Yeah.
Mhm. But just to push just a little bit more, Chairman, how about opening up more sectors of the economy? Would you be looking into that? And if so, which sectors?
Yeah, well, clearly, my view too is that our economy need to be more open. We are one of the most closed economies in our region. And if you look at data, we actually have many more problems with monopolies, oligopolies, highly concentrated industries, markets, no? More than so than what you find in Thailand or in other countries, in Asia. And part of that is really because of this lack of competition, very
Mhm.
weak com- culture of competition in the Philippines, and opening up to our economy to foreign investment will help address that issue, so that uh, there are clear benefits from opening up aside from the employment generated, the high quality jobs generated. It is of course the most important thing, but the effects of that on the prices of goods and services, because with more investment, more competition, prices would be lower than otherwise would be the case, and there would be greater variety of those goods that consumers can choose from. There would be more innovation uh,
Mhm.
introduced in the market. So there are many benefits that can be gained from opening up, and
Mhm.
we've had this kind of framework of uh, uh, Filipino first. But I think it's a misplaced. I think we can be Filipino first if we can, make our markets, get our entrepreneurs able to compete. I
Mhm.
would like to see, for example, more Filipino firms exploring companies, no? uh, opening up, expanding their markets beyond our shores.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that way, there are so many benefits for the local economy because they can also bring, when
Mhm.
they expand
Mhm.
to other shores, they see that how things are done differently there, and when they come back, they look at
Mhm.
the way they operate things here. Then they can improve innovations and so on. So, it really, I think that our potential, we have been left behind by even countries like Vietnam, which opened
Mhm.
up much later than us. No, uh,
But are there specific sectors that you're already looking at?
I'm looking at, for example, at opening up our manufacturing.
Mhm.
I really would like to see our manufacturing revive
Mhm.
because, again, if you look at the experience, the good thing about manufacturing is that it's a good source of high quality employment, even for the semi skilled workers. Uh, a big part of our workers are trapped in agriculture and informal sector. Uh, if you have a more robust manufacturing industry, those informal workers there could move to those industries, and then they will have a more better quality jobs, and therefore better lives. No? And I think that we have known for a long time what have been inhibiting investors to even stay in our shares, because many of them have left. Uh, uh, and what's needed to get them back, and for many others to come to our shares, no? And one of those that top in the line is the high cost of doing business, like the ease of doing business in this country. Uh, when I look at the data, comparable data, for example, that's regularly produced by the World Bank, you find that opening up businesses, in this country, getting the licenses to open up a business and even to close a business, is just so tedious and so cumbersome that and and I can't understand why we cannot fix that. And obviously, and that's why I like the trust of the incoming president when he said, "Let's ramp up digitalization, especially with in relation to government transactions." Then I think that if we can move in that direction, that will help address this concern. That will minimize physical contact between those who transact with government and people in government.
Will you be pushing more frequent LEDAC meetings? Parang nawala na yung LEDAC. But it's you're the secretariat, no, for LEDAC.
Yeah. When I was there in my earlier capacity, we meet regularly the LEDAC because we needed to ensure that that the our programs, yearly programs are consistent with what Congress will come up out with, because in many cases what Congress pass in terms of the elements of the legislation, the general appropriations, are very different from what was initially with the plan or submitted. Many changes that were done into the plan. So as a result, you lose coherence, you lose you lose the prioritization. And we would want to minimize that by ensuring there is a line directly connecting the executive branch and Congress when it comes to legislation of our economic agenda.
How often would you like to see those meetings in the new administration?
Well, we'll see. I still have to see how also the appetite of our president in meeting because the president sits down with. NEDA is the secretariat, but it's the president who sits down with his counterpart in Congress.
Right. We go to our last topic, that's PPP. I believe, Troy, you have questions there.
Okay. PPP is obviously a resort, sir, for a government that doesn't have much to spend. But can you talk more about how you're going to make it attractive to PPP investors? Like, one of the things that they often complain about is the permit system and how long it takes to get approvals, how long it takes to get right of way. Do you see much potential in the ease of doing business law in opening up this this area to make life easier for PPP investors, sir?
Yeah, I think that the proper implementation of the Ease of Doing Business Act will address part of that concern in a big way, I believe. In fact, in the 8-point agenda that we're preparing, that is a big part of it. It's the main element of the agenda that is doing business. Uh, the other one is, I think that the the process of approval in the cabinet is has evolved and it's become a bit more complicated. I um, I reviewed lately the various committees and cluster system. We have the NEDA board system, and we have the other cabinet clusters. And what we are proposing to the president is to um, uh, minimize, reduce uh, those meetings, make our meetings more efficient by collapsing those clusters and the board system into just one system, so that there's only one track that is being followed in the approval of projects. So that's one, and we hope to get that approval when once we hit the ground running. The other one is this. I think the negotiation of the terms of the contract is also usually quite long, especially the most contentious issues there would be usually the sharing of risk and the contingency liability. Uh, we have learned quite a bit already since the introduction of PPP in our landscape, and we need to take advantage of those lessons to further improve the system. Uh, we need to come to, of course, balance the situation such that risks are shared instead of disproportionately burdening one actor, especially if that actor is not uh, responsible for the risk anyway, or, or the risk is coming from the actions the, of the other party. No? Like in the case when government changed the rules in the middle of the game, should that risk be borne by the private proponent, project proponent? Those are the kind of questions that are usually tough to work on, and work on. So, but I believe that we need to achieve some sort of fair balancing act.
Well, in looking to improve the PPP framework, are you considering any models outside some other country?
Oh, obviously, we have learned the models that we uh, have been employing were best practices from the
Mhm.
global. We learned from the practices of countries like Australia.
I've heard Georgia, for instance, even
Yeah,
Georgia.
yeah, Georgia has a very good one too. I saw that one too. Yeah, so but toward the end of 2015, 2016, many countries in our regions are actually coming to learn our system, our PPP, because the ours was more advanced than what they have. No,
Mhm.
understandably, or for one reason or another, uh, the current administration uh, saw other sources of funding for infrastructure projects, and resorted less to PPP. But now the situation is different. Uh, I guess at that time it's understandable. Our fiscal resources are very are healthy, and we're healthy. it's still healthy today, I believe, but if we don't manage it well, it can easily run dry and get us into trouble. So I think that we need to get the private sector come in. The beauty for me also, another beauty for me also of the PPP is uh, when you have so much demand for public infrastructure, and this, especially in urban areas, uh, and yet these infrastructure projects are quite financially viable. It's profitable for the private sector, and the private sector is awash with funds, with capital. They're parking their money in treasury bills and bonds, and rather than in plants and infrastructure. So, uh, if it can be this investment can be made attractive for them, more attractive than parking their money in bonds, then I think uh, they would come in, and then we save a lot of resources, and you can use those resources to address our very weak uh, social protection system, include particularly health and education. And I mentioned earlier, poor investment in agriculture. So that's, if you want more money uh, for the latter sectors, we need to get those private sectors uh, uh, build the infrastructure that is profitable for them. At the same time, of course, the role of government is to ensure that uh, the public is not exploited. That there's a fair play. That the infrastructure provided remains accessible to, uh, to our citizens, particularly even the poor. No?
I mean, would agriculture be form a bigger part in PPP or as a sector?
I, 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 I think there is less realistically uh,
Mm.
interest there, except for
Mm.
perhaps for dams or. But even
Mm.
there, I think that government counterparts might be needed
Ah.
uh, in a big way. Uh, there may be, I think that government counterparts can be rationalized if, for example, there are clear social objectives, equity objectives, like, for example, for health, for
Mm.
hospitals, for example. We want those hospitals to be accessible to the poor, uh, and still, uh, and that improves equity and access to health by the poor, then government must be able provide support to these projects, making it viable for the private sector.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other question? Oh, Norman, yes.
Mr. Balisacan.
Last question, yeah.
Speaking of
Yeah,
PPP, I think did I hear you right that we're going to review all pending projects of the outgoing government, including those being funded by China? And what will be your criteria? What will lead you to discontinue a project?
no, no. What I said was that we will clearly take a look at those projects that are that are there, that are being implemented, and that are about to be implemented, or those that are still going to go through the approval process. Now, uh, if the documents and the data that we have already do show that the ongoing projects, and especially those that are near completion projects, uh, are indeed uh, viable and will achieve their objectives, especially if these are also addressing the same objective as what we have, it is uh, generating jobs. Uh, then they should continue, and they should be given priority for our budget. We should not use these tight fiscal constraint as an excuse not to. And then take a look at some of those other projects that might, if they are not yet implemented, but will not or not likely contribute in so far as the immediate concerns uh, for job creation are concerned, then perhaps that can wait for maybe the next fiscal year or the year after, when our resources are better, when the economy is able to get out of this crisis. That's what we mean here. We are not saying that we will, re, re, you know, as if we suspect that there is something wrong, not that we review that. That's not the intention. It's just that our the challenges that we're facing this year are enormous. Uh, Looming food crisis, all this power crisis, and and at the same time, we want our economy to move out quickly of its recovery phase, and so generating jobs. So we are, balancing these things. Will make that you can review critical, especially for the proposed 2023 budget.
All right. Thank you, sir. To finish, perhaps, Chairman, maybe we can have your message to our viewers on what they can expect from you and your agency in the next 6 years.
Well, I have been privileged to and honored to lead again this agency, and I would like. I think that I've learned a lot of lessons during the first time, and observing the economy since then to now. I think that I am returning to NEDA with much more informed, you know, environment, and I, I think that one of the things I would like to do is to improve the transparency of our work, particularly on policies, projects, so that the public is aware of any changes in policy, in regulations, in public investments. And so that's what we have to work on to ensure that we gain the trust of our people, particular stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your views and your time.
Thank you so much.
That wraps up this conversation today. Thanks for watching.